me.
Mr. President.
Senator from Ohio.
Thank you. I ask unanimous consent to dispense with the quorum call.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. This weekend, I believe it was Saturday, I was in Lordstown, Ohio, celebrating the 2-year anniversary of the first Chevy Cruze that came off the Lordstown GM Chevy plant line. I was there the day the first Cruzes came off. The first 3 cars, painted red, white, and blue, represented the determination of workers and that company and the nation to succeed, to bounce back, despite national naysayers who are willing to stand idly by while our economy stalled. We read it in newspapers, we saw it on television, we heard on the radio how some elected officials not just wanted to turn their back on an industry that has provided middle-class wages and college educations and homes and cars and to millions of Americans, want not just turn their back on that industry, but a number of elected officials wanted to bet against the American automotive industry. During the height of the economic crisis, when American manufacturing was sputtering, and you know the statistics, Mr. President, because you've paid attention in your state of Alaska, as it is not so much a manufacturing state, but a state that contributes a lot to manufacturing. You know what's happened in this country. From 2000 to 2010, we lost 5 million manufacturing jobs. That was 1/3 of all the manufacturing jobs in this country. 60,000 plants closed in the United States in that decade. But since 2010, and more on that in a moment, because of the auto rescue, because we now have a federal government that's willing to enforce trade laws, we've seen a growth of 500,000 manufacturing. First time we've seen month to month to month to month manufacturing job growth almost every month for 2+ years. First time since 1999 in this country we've actually seen any manufacturing job growth. Some said let the industry go bankrupt. Presidential candidate said, I believe his words were along the lines of to Detroit, drop dead, that it wasn't something we wanted to do anything to help that industry. They were willing to let the auto industry go bankrupt and then see what happens. They thought it was okay, some of these naysayers thought it was okay to bail out Wall Street. They thought it was okay to pad the salaries of reckless bankers who drove our economy off a cliff. It wasn't the auto worker, the non-union auto worker in Marysville that built the Honda. It wasn't the Chrysler auto worker in Toledo that built the Wrangler or the Liberty. It wasn't the Chevy auto worker in Lordstown that built the Cruze. It wasn't the auto worker in Defiance that built the engine, or the glass worker in Crestline that made the glass for the Chevy Cruze, or the aluminum worker in Cleveland, or the steel worker in Middletown. It wasn't they who caused this collapse of the economy and caused these problems with the banks, but in many ways they were blamed by the people who bet against America, who were willing to say it's okay to pad the salary of reckless bankers, even though they're the ones that drove the economy off the cliff. They railed against rescuing auto workers in places like Holmesville and Waverly and Middletown and Youngstown. Well, the easy road, and it wasn't the easy road by a long shot, the easy road isn't always the right path, not when this many jobs are at stake, paying these kind of wages, strengthening this middle class. The Chevy Cruze represents what was at stake. 3 days ago when I was in Lordstown, we marked the day of the anniversary, the 2-year anniversary. How resilient we can be when we make decisions, not based on politics, Mr. President, but on what's best for the country. Plain and simple, the auto rescue was the right choice. Just last year, the Cruze was awarded 2011 Car of the Year by the North American Dealer Association. Now it's the best-selling compact car in America. My daughter drives one. My wife traded in her 6-year-old Pontiac Vibe and bought a Chevy Cruze. Just a few short years ago, 1,000 workers in Lordstown near Youngstown were laid off. Today, nearly 5,000 workers build one of the fastest-selling small cars in the country. For people like Glenn Johnson, who's the local president in the Lordstown Assembly Plant, The politically unpopular decision to save the auto industry was about saving the livelihood of hardworking families in Ohio and in the Midwest. 2 years later, we're moving forward. GM profits are up. GM's been profitable for 10 consecutive quarters. None of the naysayers thought that possibly could happen. None of the naysayers were willing to invest in GM to find the private capital. It only happened because taxpayers stepped forward, because the government was willing to understand and recognize that this mattered for our country. GM has announced plans to make a $200 million additional investment in Lordstown now, where they've added a third shift to produce the Chevy Cruze. Chrysler has invested tens of millions of dollars in Toledo. Honda has invested tens of millions of dollars in a new model in Marysville. Ford has invested tens of millions of dollars in Cleveland. In all three American auto companies and the major U.S. auto transplant, Honda, have all made major investments in Ohio since the auto industry, since the auto rescue. The Cruze epitomizes how central the auto industry is in Ohio. The engine for the Cruze is made in Defiance, and transmission for the Cruze is made in Toledo. The brackets are made in Brunswick. The glass for the Wrangler is made in Crestline. The sound system for the Cruze is made in Springboro. The steel for the Cruze, underneath steel, comes from Middletown. The exposed steel comes from Cleveland. The seat frame comes from Lorain. The seats are made in Warren. 5,000. The aluminum for the Chevy Cruze Echo comes from Cleveland. The car is assembled by 5,000 workers in Lordstown, Ohio. This success story, though, goes far beyond one state. But in my state alone, hundreds of thousands of jobs are associated with the auto industry. 120,000 Ohioans are directly employed by automakers, dealers, and supply chain parts manufacturers. But, Mr. President, we know, even with that success, even with the success of enforcing trade laws, which have turned into, as a result of enforcing trade rules, we have a new steel mill in Youngstown. More tires are made in Findlay. More aluminum is made in Heath and in Sydney, Ohio. More steel is made in Lorain. More steel is made in Cleveland. Because we've enforced trade rules, that doesn't mean we don't need to do more. The economy is still not what it should be. Our unemployment rate from 2 years ago went from over 10.5% to under 7.5%, but it's clearly still not enough because far too many workers in America, in Ohio and Alaska, all over, are underemployed or are unemployed. But we're moving in the right direction. Just like I said, since January 2010, after a full decade of manufacturing job loss from 2000 to 2010, 5 million manufacturing jobs lost, we have gained 500,000 manufacturing jobs in those 2 years. Supporting America means valuing workers. It's patriotic to support America's middle class. When it comes to protecting American workers and supporting American manufacturers and boosting America's middle class, we still have much to do. We've made major progress in the last 3 years. We have much to do. We have no choice but to move forward. Thank you, Mr. President. President.
Senator from Ohio.
Asking the Senate proceed to a period of morning business with senators permitted to speak therein for up to 10 minutes each.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I ask that the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration en bloc of the following resolutions which were submitted earlier today: S-Res 548, S-Res 549, and S-Res 560.
Without objection, the Senate will proceed to the measures.
I ask unanimous consent the resolutions be agreed to, the preambles be agreed to, the motions to reconsider be laid on the table in block with no intervening action or debate, and that any statements related to the resolutions be printed in the record at the appropriate place as if read.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent. When the Senate completes its business today, it adjourn until 9:30 a.m. on Wednesday, September 12th. The following prayer and pledge to the Journal of Proceedings be approved to date. The morning hour be deemed expired. The time for the two leaders be reserved for their use later in the day. That the Senate resume consideration of the motion to proceed to S. 3457, the Veterans Job Corps Act, post-cloture, and that the first 70 minutes be equally divided and controlled between the two leaders or their designees, with the Republicans controlling the first half half and the majority the latter half. Further, that all time during adjournment, recess, and morning business be counted post-cloture. On the motion to proceed to S. 3457.
Without objection.
Mr. President, we'll begin consideration of the Veteran Job Corps Act tomorrow. Senators will be notified when votes are scheduled. If there's no further business to come before the Senate, I ask that we adjourn under the previous order.
Senate will stand adjourned to September 12th, Wednesday, 9:30 a.m.
Finishing up the day here in the U.S. Senate on